I absolutely love recording Leadership Insights podcasts. In these episodes, I get the opportunity to ask care leaders 14 questions about leadership, and I've had the pleasure of interviewing some truly inspiring leaders. This week, I had the pleasure of interviewing Muhammad Damji, the Managing Director of Caring Crew. Although Muhammad is a young man, his wisdom makes him appear older than his years. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. My name's Simon Parker, and this is the Care Leaders Network podcast. Today, I'm downloading leadership insights from a great young leader from the care sector. So, Muhammad, tell me, do you believe that leaders are born or are they made?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's one that I think about a lot, but they're definitely made. I don't think anyone's born with an innate nature. Even with like public speaking, people I think he's a born public speaker or he's a born, footballer or anything like that. Nobody's born anything. They're born into an environment. Doesn't that environment, the parenting, the childhood, the schooling, the friendships, the relationships, those experiences are what make you into who you are. And look, anyone can really become a leader if they're party to those experiences, if they develop that attribute, that skill within themselves. I can openly say I wasn't a leader before. I enjoyed being in leadership positions. Yes, I enjoyed that, but I wasn't a very good leader. And the only way I was able to become one was by putting myself in those positions, by struggling, by being in a difficult scenario where I realized I'm not very good at this, and then speaking to advisors, mentors, guides, reading about it, learning about it, and then implementing it. And that's how you really become a good leader. So leaders are made for sure.
What's really interesting about that, and it's almost because of the specific answer, it's somewhat ironic that I ended up consuming this piece of content recently. But I've mentioned this chap on the podcast a load of other times before. There's a brilliant ex-military American now management consultant, a chap called Jocko Willink, who, if you haven't studied him yourself before, or anyone in the audience has studied his stuff before in the past, just search YouTube, have a look. If you like his stuff on YouTube, he's got some brilliant books. But he's taken the learnings from leadership in the military and then learn how to codify and to build a system of leadership that you can learn. And he talks very passionately about the fact that he believes that it's a skill. So it's just interesting, the fact that I think I followed his stuff for a long time. I watched a short video of his on LinkedIn, and he was really underlining that particular point around that's connected to the point that you've positioned there around the fact that people can become leaders, and that it's something that you can develop as well. So I always like asking this question immediately after as well, because there's connective tissue between these two questions. But just to add to that, to the question around whether leaders are born or are they made, do you believe that leadership is an art or a science? And explain to me your reason why.
It's difficult to put a name to this, because what is an art and what is a science, realistically? We like to attribute buzzwords to skills and qualities and things like this. But I think what the question is really asking is it something that is specific, or is it something that is not specific? Is it something that has a design to it, that has a process to it, or is it not? Which is what it's saying. It's a science will generally have a formula towards it. Say, this is what you need to do to be a good leader. And art will be something that you have to design mostly by yourself a lot of the time. It's quite personalized. In this regard, listen, management is a science, right? Management tells you need to do things in this process. You need to manage people in this way. You need to manage processes in so and so way. Leadership is definitely an art, or something that needs to be designed by yourself. Something it's not data driven. There's a lot more risk, more passion involved. Management is more specific, has an objective towards it. With a leader, you're trying to create your own objectives a lot of the time and grow towards that. And look, at the end of the day, you can always hire a manager, but you can't hire a leader. You have to develop a leader a lot of the time.
So you've touched upon this as well. You've almost jumped into the point on my next question is, what would you say the difference between management and leadership is?
Yeah, it's just about that. Is that management has a science to it. It has objectives to it. It has certain things towards it. As a manager, you hold responsibility for people and for your department. And management is more sort of, design, it's more technical. Leadership is more emotional, it's more passion, it's more risk, it's more decision driven. And it's also more about sort of bringing people along with you, bringing people along with you on the ride, on the journey, moving this company or this ship or this organization forward. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult to be a good leader without good managers involved. But the difference between them is leadership is when your decisions will impact, a whole organization, and management is when your performance will impact sort of a department or something like that. So I view it in that sort of, it's not a hierarchy, but it's kind of in sync. Both have to work for an organization to do well.
And it's an interesting point that you raised there as well, because both one can't exist without the other. Like, and people are often a mixture of a blend between the two. The feedback that I get from the teams that I've been involved in is that my management isn't as good as it could be, whereas my leadership is better, and that's something that I'm working hard to address. But it's often fascinating how different people have a natural affinity to one or the other, and then to become almost more well-rounded, one has to be self-aware enough to be able to develop their management or their leadership capabilities, because you like I work in a leadership capacity, but then I have to have management oversight of my team, etc. And to your point, there's kind of they have to be connected, but they're two very definitive skill sets.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, it's one thing you said about, it's really good that you bring it up. You understand that you're a good leader, but maybe not as good a manager as you might want to be. And you've done that by talking to your peers and saying, what can I do better? And that is a sign of good leadership. It's trying to understand what your weaknesses are. How can I improve it? How can I get better at something else within my skill set? And how can I move forward with it? And definitely those two things work in tandem. And look, becoming the ultimate leader, that's also a good manager. It's an almost impossible task, but you can only work towards something and then aspire to be better, right?
It's an interesting one. I see. I've recently taken up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is it's like a form of grappling, and I'm very lucky that the gym that I go to where the people that do the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu train together, we have a higher density of black belts in the group of people that attend this gym than most of the other gyms in the country, and all of the black belts are still working really hard on honing their craft after a lot of them have done it for kind of 10 or 15 years. And when I went to my last training session, it kind of reminded me of both leadership and management, in as much as the fact that it's you can't just achieve it. It's something that changes and evolves over time, and you change and evolve over time, and the context changes and evolves over time. And it's one of those life lessons that you can kind of almost art imitating life, or kind of personal life imitating professional life type scenarios, that it just stopped and maybe for a little while around how that whole evolution and things works, and how you have to develop yourself working in a leadership role to continue honing those skills and those different kind of attributes and characteristics and things as well.
Remind me never to get in a physical fight with you.
I'm not very good at the white belt, so I'm only about 6 lessons in so far, although I've definitely become hooked very very quickly. But I describe it as it's almost like a physical version of chess. It's quite a cerebral, although it's a martial art, it's quite a cerebral endeavor, if you like, which is part of the appeal for it. So maybe I'll try and share some more leadership Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu anecdotes at some point in the future as well. But
make it its own podcast series as well. Yeah.
Could well be. I love recording a podcast, so I'm sure there's going to be all sorts of things that I can share about my learnings. But for today, obviously, I want to focus on you and our conversation for the moment. So, my next question, I think, is one that I think an awful lot about, and that is, at what point does somebody become a leader?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because it's very difficult to understand your position as a leader. It's easy to delegate tasks, and it's easy to say, I'm not responsible for this and somebody else is. But at the end of the day, if you're at the top of the organization, if the buck stops with you, if you don't report to anyone else, if you are a decision maker and you've been given a load of responsibility, then you are a leader. Even if you do report to someone else, if you have certain objectives and if you have responsibility of certain decisions, and at the point where your decisions impact somebody else, that's when you kind of become, a real leader, that you hold that burden of responsibility for the organization, for your staff members, that if you don't achieve certain things within the organization, your staffing will suffer, or your profitability will suffer, or your management will suffer. And at that point, when you hold that weight on your shoulders, when you can't sleep at night because you're thinking about work, that's when you become a leader, because you've taken on that responsibility.
Really interesting way that you framed that. Thank you, Mohammed. What would you say the common misconceptions that people often have about leaders and about leadership?
I think people often think that leaders have an arrogant nature to them, that that they think that they're better than others, or leaders are a little bit lazy because they delegate a lot, or they're too busy for others, and that generally tends to come with people's personality. If they talk in a certain way, or if they show things in a certain way, if as a leader, because you're so stressed out because you have so much on your plate, you can sometimes be dismissive to other requests, or if something's not as important to you as it is to somebody else, you might not action it straight away, which inadvertently tells somebody else that this isn't important to me right now, and it makes them feel less important. So it can create that notion around it. Leaders think that they're better than others, which isn't always true. Leaders have a lot of pressure on their shoulders, a lot of responsibility, and it's not easy to manage. Not everyone's a good leader or a perfect leader or even a great leader. So it's difficult to sometimes balance that. And like you said earlier, everybody's a work in progress, and so are the leaders themselves, right? They're constantly honing their craft. So one of the learnings will be that, if your colleague or your staff member comes to you with a request or a concern, you need to show some appreciation for their problem and either find a solution for them or help them find a solution together. And even if you haven't got the time, then, say that to them, to say, I haven't got time to deal with this right now. Can we come back to it at a later stage? Things like that, clear communication, those are some of the things that can fix these misconceptions. But one of the misconceptions that people most commonly have is that leaders have the answer to everything. And that is, really, really untrue, because I'm a leader in my organization and I definitely do not have the answer to a lot of the questions that come my way. What I'm good at is problem solving. So I'll find the answer. I'll speak to people, I'll speak to an organization, I'll read about it, I'll find out about it, and I'll come back and say, here's what we're going to do. But the number of people that are in leadership positions, or the Venn diagram between people that are in leadership positions and people that are winging it, is almost just one circle. It literally is.
Yeah, we chatted about that a little bit before the podcast, didn't we? About the fact that there are, as a leader, and I think one of the things that leaders have to be able to do is to be able to plot a chart, often without a map. They have to be able to without certainty. They need to be able to make decisions on often minimal amounts of data, and a certain amount of that just comes from kind of intuition and learned experiences and things like that. But there is an element of, as you say, winging it sometimes. And I think you mentioned this as well earlier. Communication around these things is so super important. I've had it in sets of circumstances where me and my team have been working on a particular set of circumstances. We'll be talking through like a problem or something like that, and inevitably, if it's a tough cookie to try and work out, people will look to me and say, so Si, what do you think? And I mean, it happens reasonably frequently where I'll say, folks, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know the answer to this question, or at least I don't know yet. Maybe here are some things that we could do to try and explore this thing in more detail. Maybe here are a few more data points. Maybe this is something that we could go and research. But yeah, I can definitely sympathize with the point around the fact that leaders don't always have the answers. And I think if you try and cover that up, people can work that out. You know, people
Yeah.
they'll see through that, and then that might be something that people could see as being a negative thing and look down upon you, because it's just evident that if you are winging it, or like you've got more research to do to get to a point where you've got that particular answer. Well, there's two things. There's being authentic and just being like, folks, I don't know the answer to this question. We've got some work to do to get to that point. But then also, I think it can be used as a way to endear and empower your team as well. Say, look, like, we're a smart bunch of people. We'll work it out. Like, what we're going to do together to try and make sure that we know the answer to this question, so we can make this decision or judgment call or thing that we need to be able to do as well. And for me personally, I find that really good fun. You know, because
Yes, definitely.
self doing problem solving and things like that, if you can bring people on that journey with you as well, it can be really empowering for the team. And then you can start looking at, so who are the leaders of the future, who are the people that are
Yeah.
to be able to try and be the person that can make those decisions and things in the future as well. So it's a worthwhile exercise being presented with the circumstances where you don't have all the answers, because that's what we get. That's what we're about. If you've got a big purpose and a big mission, if you're breaking new ground, you're going to come up against an awful lot of stuff that you just aren't going to have the answers to.
Yeah, I mean, look, part of being a good leader is showing your colleagues how to also be good leaders, sharing those leadership traits with them. One thing I like to do is, if we found a problem, or if one of my colleagues comes to me with a problem and says, we don't know what to do in the scenario, I go, well, I don't know either. So how about, you spend a day looking for a solution, and let's have a team meeting tomorrow, and you can present some solutions, some options, and we can all talk about it and give our feedback on it. And that gives them the power to go, you know what, yeah, it's a problem that I found. Let me try and solve it, so that I can see if it's something that I can do by myself. And it's not just delegation, but it's also empowering other people to make decisions for themselves, and understanding that they are capable of finding solutions, not just identifying problems.
Also, on the flip side of that, so if you do provide people with answers all too often, you can train learned helplessness, which is, it will be impossible for you personally to grow, and for your organization to grow, because if everyone's entirely reliant on you, because you're the person that gives the answers and you're the person that shares all the insights all the time, you immediately become a bottleneck. And I think probably something that leaders who are kind of developing their craft, I think everyone probably comes up against that at some point or another, and even seasoned leaders end up falling into that trap at some point, because sometimes you just need to make the decision. You just want to crack on. You just want to make the things happen. You want to just give that answer just so that people can crack on. But there's a cost to that as well. So you touched upon this slightly in your previous question, but I'm interested to hear your view on, what would you say the difference is between a good leader and a great leader?
Look, I'm a very young leader, so I haven't got buckets of experience in this regard. But my understanding of it is, a good leader will steer the ship in the right direction. A great leader will develop others to also steer the ship, or another ship. I find people in some industries, they're scared to upskill their staff members because they're worried that they'll leave. And look, that's understandable, but you also have to respect that everybody wants to grow, or at least most people want to grow to a certain extent. So if somebody wants to complete their level 5 and reach a management position within the care industry, for example, facilitating that is being a great leader, and maybe they can support you in expanding the business. Maybe they'll go somewhere else, and get a job as a manager somewhere else. And maybe after getting years of experience there, they might come back to you. But supporting people in their journey will also mean that they support you back in your journey as well. So a great leader, I think, really develops other people alongside themselves.
So that's an interesting point as well. So you're let me see whether my interpretation of what you've described is correct. So what you're saying is almost the difference between a good leader and a great leader is the great leader is able to almost have like a mindset of succession planning. So it's not necessarily that they're going to leave, but it's developing the person who's maybe junior to them so that they can almost fulfill the expectations of the more senior person's role, because they're on an upward trajectory, and it's creating a space and environment and providing the kind of the resource and the mentorship, etc., for them to ascend their professional development. Is that kind of where you're going with that answer?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there are so many options on the table when you upskill somebody within your organization. The number one thing is that if you show loyalty towards your staff members or your colleagues, they will show that back to you. And if that means commitment towards the organization, towards its growth, towards different tasks and workloads, then they will definitely be on your journey with you.
And I think that's a key part of that as well, is bringing people on the journey with them, because if people in kind of the ultimate leadership position or in a kind of senior leadership position, part of the almost the responsibility is to be able to impart that knowledge and insight and experience and things over time. And the only way that you do that is to be vulnerable and kind of to open up about your experiences and talk about the things that you've done well and the things that you've not done so well, and to give people the confidence and things to be able to grow. So you've thrown in some really, really good examples of leaders and about leadership. What would you say that the three most important characteristics of a leader would be?
Oh man, Simon, I hate bite-sized information. How can you limit a question like this to three characteristics?
There's got to be three most important ones. If you don't like, also don't feel like you need to stop at three as well. I'd like the three most important ones, but if you think there's another couple
Yeah,
to throw in there,
I
feel free.
mean, you can almost segment some into one of the others. So I'll try and fit it into three, and there'll be like subatomic particles involved in this little truth bomb. But I think the number one thing is authenticity. Being yourself, and part of that is honesty. Being honest with your staff members, with your colleagues, with your partners, with your shareholders, whoever it is that you're speaking to in business. Showing a level of honesty is being authentic to your own nature. And then the secondary part of that is empathy and just the ability to listen. Simon Sinek speaks a lot about leaders speaking last. Even if you know the solution to the problem at the start of the meeting, always speak at the end, because you want everybody in the room to feel like they've been heard, that their thoughts have been taken into account, that their opinions and their ideas have been considered before you've come to your conclusion. If you as a leader just come in and direct only without listening, you're not showing an empathy, you're not showing an understanding and a willingness to listen or take into account their perspective. And what you're telling them really is you're just here to do work, not to think. Part of being authentic is being able to connect with your colleagues and staff members to say, I understand your perspective, this is great, I'll take this from your perspective, but also I will speak last to make sure that you're heard. So that's, I think, one of the most important things for me. The second one is really a drive or an appetite to risk. One thing that people who are not leaders struggle with is taking risks. And like you said, making decisions that have low data information on it, that don't have much intelligence around it, but that you make from your gut feeling. And the reason you do that is because you have a passion or a drive towards making that happen. And when you make those gut feeling decisions, you really, put your all into it. And that's what good leaders do. I'm not saying make every single decision from your gut. There's enough data and a lot of decisions to be made. But there are some decisions where you just don't know what to do, and you have to choose between one or the other. And that's what makes, a leader into a good or a great leader, is how good they are at making that kind of decision. But you have to have the drive to see things through, whether it's, the hustle culture of being up at 11 p.m. working, or whether it's the discipline of working day and night to make sure you're organization or your goals or your objectives are met. It's about passing on that passion and drive to the people working alongside you as well. And then the final thing is being decisive and clinical. It's so difficult, especially in business today, when you have so many options on the table. So many options on the table. It's very difficult to be decisive as to what to go for. Even in starting business, I've met so many people just in the last 4 or 5 years that are like, "Oh, how did you get into business?" I go, "Well, we just did. We saw an opportunity. We did some numbers on it. We spoke to a few people for advice. I spoke to my family for some support, and we just went for it. Oh, but how did you do this? And what about this? And what about that?" Yeah, all of those things considered, at some point, you've got to dive into the sea head first. There is no, when it comes to business or when it comes to leadership, there is no sort of pilot study, or there's not enough time to do all of that testing for you to absolutely be 100% sure that things are going to be successful. Something like COVID hits you, your whole business can suffer really. So being decisive, being clinical, taking responsibility for your decisions, I think that's, the third most important thing that leaders need to have.
Three really, really, really important points. So thank you for that. That's really nicely put as well. So how do you see leadership evolving over time?
Definitely becoming more challenging. I mean, I speak to my father a lot about this because he's been a leader for, the longest time. He finished school and went straight into, a job, and then shortly after just started his own business. And I speak to him about what leadership was like back in the day, and the challenges now are much different. The market is way more competitive. There's so many more industries at play. Technology has changed so much of how things work. But also, like back in the day, it was the Industrial Revolution, so everyone was looking for a job. So, staffing was a lot easier. Now, there's hundreds of organizations out there. Just in the last 2 years, I think there's been so many care organizations started up, and some gone down, unfortunately, as well. But people are, becoming a lot more entrepreneurial over the last few years, and that's a good challenge to have. But it makes things harder as a leader to kind of implement and to get things going. There's a lot of people move jobs a lot, so continuity and longevity in the organization is difficult to maintain. There's so much content on social media, and as good as LinkedIn is for connecting and networking, there is so much on there that is just glorified, and it's just people speak about only the good stuff, or they speak about all the stuff they've achieved. If you're going to talk, nobody talks like that in person. Nobody walks up to you in person and goes, "Hey, by the way, yesterday I was on holiday and this is how I linked it to business." That's not a normal conversation to have. If you're on holiday, you're on holiday. That's great. I'm really not a fan of the fact that LinkedIn algorithm it works really well for people who post selfies. I think it's creating a culture whereby you have to post a picture of yourself. That's not relevant to the content itself, and that dumbs down the content sometimes. And that affects authenticity. But it makes leadership more difficult because what appears as good leadership may not always be good leadership. So you find it challenging to understand even what good leadership is in today's day and age. But I think in that regard, maintaining authenticity can really stand out. But also, I think in today's day and age, involving young people in organizations at a younger age is really, really important. I mean, historically, the CV method of recruiting, looking for really high experience, good experience, was always the gold standard for recruitment. In today's day and age, young people are really driven towards working. So if you bring a young person between the age of 18 to 20, to come and work in your organization, you support them, you upskill them, you give them the right guidance and advice and the platform to grow, you can get some really, really good staff members in your organization. And that works for the care industry as well. The problem we have right now is, there's not enough education around the opportunities in the care industry. People think that it's just the care assistant roles. And look, they are hard, they're difficult, they're challenging to do. We have some really good young carers in our organization. They're passionate. Gen Z is very, very purpose-led, very purpose-led. And they care about what they do. It's not just about having a job and getting money. It's about doing something that's purposeful. So the care industry is a match made in heaven for them, because we do something that's very, very purpose-led. We look after people, whether it's in their own homes, in care homes, in supported living, in any care environment. We're looking after people, making sure that they live well, and hopefully if they can live independently as well. So involving young people in this industry, inviting them to work in different roles, whether it's marketing, admin, tech, care coordination, managing staff members, recruitment. There's so much going on in this industry that young people can get involved in, that I think it's time that leaders start to open their doors to people with less experience, but who have more drive.
That last point I think is very, very interesting, and I think there's I can see why you've highlighted that particularly for the care sector. I'm interested to hear about the greatest challenges that you've faced as a leader, and also what you've learned as a consequence of facing those challenges.
I mean, I'm still facing challenges all the time. One of the biggest things I find is, you have to motivate yourself. And there's no one really holding you accountable. Yes, there will be people that you work with that hold you accountable, but at the end of the day, getting stuff done is the number one priority as a leader, and nobody's there to check on your work. And it's really difficult to motivate yourself all the time. And it's a challenge that I face constantly. There are parts of work that are fun. There are parts of work that are boring. Sometimes the spreadsheets, the emails, the analytics, that kind of stuff can be mind numbing, but they're necessary. And doing the necessary things, and motivating yourself to continuously keep doing it all the time, that's a real challenge. What I've learned as a consequence is I've struggled with discipline, and that's something I generally have. Even with the half marathon that I ran a couple of days ago, I didn't train that much because I struggle with discipline and consistency. So it's something I'm working on. What I'm doing is I'm trying to put myself forward for these big challenges where you need to have discipline and consistency, and to build that resilience within myself to have that attribute. But one of the other challenges I faced very early on as a leader was communicating clearly with my colleagues and staff members. And that was a challenge I suffered with, because I wasn't able to get across what my thoughts were in a clear fashion. And if you can't communicate a message to your team clearly, they will not be able to take it on board. Mixed messaging is a real problem, and they don't know what they've come away with from that meeting. So understanding how communication works, understanding how everybody understands things. You need to speak to people not the way that you understand it, but the way that they will understand it. And tailoring your message for even each individual team member, but also tailoring it to people's personalities and how they would understand it, is really, really important. Breaking it down, showing them why your decision about this makes sense, what the objectives are behind this, what the reasoning and logic is behind this. That's really, really important. And that's a constant challenge you face, because you have no one to help you on this journey realistically. You need to figure out a lot of the stuff by yourself, and that's a good challenge to have.
It's definitely does a good job of keeping leaders out of mischief, just working out how to be the best version of themselves, and to make sure that they're communicating clearly about the purpose, the vision, and the kind of setting the context for the organization. So yeah, really, really good points. Appreciate that. Tell me, which leaders inspire you the most personally?
I take inspiration from a lot of people, from different elements of different individuals, from their successes, their achievements. But two people that I would say well-rounded, I look up to, for the most part. One is my father, and the person that looked after me throughout my life alongside my mom. He's given me endless amounts of advice, but mostly through action, not through words. He was never a sort of a verbal motivator, but he showed me how to live my life in a very practical way. There are things that he did that I didn't realize he was teaching me, but I realized once I got into business that I'm doing this because he did it. And I think this works because he showed me that it works. Simple things like investing in peripheral relationships, people that are on your periphery, that you don't have any business relationship with, but showing them some goodwill, showing them that, I care about you, I'm here for you, making the extra phone call, checking in on someone, going for a coffee with someone, that might come back to you in 5 years' time. You might be in business with them. You might, need to, they might look after you with a certain service or a product, or you might do a deal together, for example. But that goodwill from other people only comes when you take the first step. I grew up in Dubai, in a Muslim country. So for a celebration of Eid, which is the end of the month of Ramadan for Muslims, my dad would send round chocolate baskets or date hampers or gift baskets to all of his clients and his suppliers and colleagues. Little things that he would do to engage with them, to say, thank you for being a client of mine, or thank you for being a supplier of mine, or here I am thinking about you on this day of Eid, and there would be numbers of those things that I didn't realize were him teaching me through action. He'd always go out of his way. He was a very service-led person. And so he always told me, if you do things, do them properly, otherwise don't do it at all. And that's something I try to live by throughout my life. The second individual that I take inspiration from the most is Malcolm X. And I think the adversity that he went through, that I really connect with, because he's a man that didn't have access to resource, to education, to opportunity, but he carved it out for himself simply by reading, by speaking to people. And the number one thing he did was convince himself that what he was doing was right. And even after, whatever he went through, when he realized he wasn't always maybe in the right place at the right time, his ability to acknowledge that and change his ways very quickly, that's the level of authenticity that I've not seen many people reach. And that's something I really, really connect with. He's something that I think failing is, that teaches people that failing is not a problem. Failure is part of life. One of his quotes that I really like is that there is no better teacher than adversity. Every defeat, every heartbreak, every loss contains its own seed and its own lesson on how to improve your performance the next time. And it's just about taking what you can from every element of your life and improving yourself on it.
Oh, I love that. I think that's it's so true as well. We almost get primed at a societal level. Kids get primed that failure is a bad thing. Couldn't be further away from the truth. The more you fail, like the more you grow as a person. As long as you work out what the lessons are from those failures. Gosh, like I did a million examples of things that I could throw out there, but just to kind of underline the point, I think that I completely agree with you on that one. If you can, it doesn't matter that you fail. It matters that you learn. And I think the more learning opportunities through failure that you can get, the more rounded and the more capable, more experienced human that you're going to be. So yeah, completely love that. Tell me, what would you say the best piece of leadership advice is that you've ever been given?
Well, look, I always say the one my dad gave me, which is, if you're going to do something, do it properly. Give it your 100%, otherwise don't do it at all. But one that's specific to the care industry, and I got very early on when I started, was your front line is your bottom line. And what that means is the people that are delivering your service to your clients, to your customers, they will define what your bottom line looks like. If you're trying to achieve a good bottom line, a good level of profit in your organization, focus on your customer service, focus on your frontline, focus on the people that are standing in front of your clients and delivering a service or a product to them. And as long as you can do that well, your business will do well.
I guess that's almost like a slightly different version of Branson's your team is your first customer, or your team is more important. I'm ruining the anecdote. Everyone's heard of it, but the that your employees come first before your customers, because if you look after your team, your team will look after your customers. It's almost that.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I definitely on board with that one. I think that's often one that's can be misunderstood and misplaced, but it's a great mindset to have when conducting oneself in a leadership capacity. So right, so we're at the final question. So Muhammad, you are standing at a lectern in front of a room of aspiring leaders, and you have 1 minute to inspire them, what do you say?
Probably say, please speak to Simon Parker. He does a podcast with a bunch of leaders. He knows everything about leadership at this point.
Hopefully, it's a useful podcast. So, once you said that, what would you say thereafter?
I think my biggest learning over the last few years is success is not a straight line. It's up and down. It's a joy. You have to find a way to make it a joyful ride. You've got to work hard. You've got to stay focused. You've got to be honest with people. And as long as you put good out into the world, the good will come back to find you. And that, look, failure is necessary, but recovery from the failure is what's most important. And finally, everybody's winging it. So don't be stressed out if you don't know what you're doing.
What a lovely way to wrap that up, Muhammad. I'm really enjoyed our conversation today. You've shared some brilliant leadership insights. All power to you on your journey, and I look forward to seeing how you grow and develop as a leader yourself.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time, man. Really appreciate being here. And listen, I look forward to learning from leaders like yourselves and others more about leadership.
Very welcome. Very welcome. Great to have you on today.